is also called a philosopher actually just means that I don't know how to tell jokes. Right, so my name is Gabriel, and I'm going to talk to you today about the family. In particular, I want to talk to you about how much we depend on our family. And the reason that I want to talk to you about that today is that there's quite a few ideas floating around our society, quite influential ideas that forget how much we depend on our families. Ideas like individualism and the idea that we should be independent, that independence is kind of one of the most fundamental markers of what it is to be sort of a fully functioning human adult. And I think one of the ways of thinking about how much we depend on our family comes to us from evolutionary biology, from what evolutionary biology teaches us about a couple of things that happened around the same time in our evolutionary history. I'm just going to adjust this a little bit because I will depend on this mic stand for this next part. So around the same time, two things happened in our evolutionary history. We started walking up, right? And this required us to develop sort of exceptionally narrow hips for primates, and for those of us who have them, exceptionally narrow birth canals. Around the same time, we started using language, really complex language, getting together in increasingly complicated social groups, and that required us to develop, again, exceptionally large brains for the animal world. And those exceptionally large brains needed exceptionally large heads to contain them. And then somehow, spoiler alert, this is how babies are made, so you don't know. Those exceptionally large heads had to somehow fit through those exceptionally narrow birth canals. So this is what's known by evolutionary biologists as the obstetrical dilemma. And evolution's sort of solution, if you will, to the obstetrical dilemma was to have humans being born kind of in a premature state by the standards of other animals. We're born exceptionally helpless, exceptionally dependent on the people around us, usually on our families, in our society, mostly on our mothers, to take care of us, to make us the people that we are. Where am I going with this? Right. Well, okay, we depend on our family. I mean, I've thrown a few facts your way, but nothing that I've said up here is really new to you. We all know that our parents raise us, for the most part, that we're dependent. So you might be thinking, why is this guy up here calling himself a philosopher and telling you things that you already know? And to that I would say, have you really haven't heard a philosopher speak before, have you? Thank you. Well, there is a reason that we do that kind of thing. And philosophers are known for sort of we're not all about sort of diving to the depths of the ocean and seeking out extremophile new life forms or going out into the cosmos. We study kind of what's closest to home, what's most obvious. This is what we're interested in, is kind of everyday truths. And often we are accused of doing something kind of pointless and meaningless for that reason. And where was I going with that? Oh yeah, okay. So there is a reason that we do that sort of thing, and it's because looking sort of closely at the most obvious and certain truths about existence, like that we depend on our family so much, can really help us identify ideas that are floating around in our society and potentially quite powerful and quite sort of influential ideas that are bullshit because they contradict those truths. And I'm talking about capitalism here. So capitalism, you may know, is sort of fundamentally based on a couple of ideas about human nature. One of which is that we are fundamentally individuals, sort of walking around, and that we pursue our own self-interest. The idea with capitalism is that it's a social system that's supposed to be able to function even though nobody out there is concerned about the common good or even just their community. but it still holds together. And in fact, the other idea is that, like, if we do start thinking too much about the common good, then we start going in sort of a more communistic route, and that route leads to despotism, to oppression, etc., etc. But the idea really is that society can function even when everybody's just pursuing what interests them, that they don't have to think about the common good. The problem is that really does deny the family, denies how all of us depend on our family to become the people we are. And that if people weren't, and again, primarily women, weren't donating their labor uncompensated, society and capitalism certainly would very quickly start to break down and stop functioning, because we wouldn't have any more workers to take care of us when we're going old. So that's a good reason for sort of rethinking this idea of the sort of the individual, the independent individual as sort of the atomic sort of thing that society is made up of. Another reason that we should maybe be skeptical about this idea is that thinking about the individual and the independent individual as sort of as that is sort of what it is to be a fully functioning human tends to it leads us to sort of stigmatize people who we single out as exceptionally dependent. And as I'm going to argue, we're all dependent. None of us are independent, really. But because some people are sort of marked in our society as particularly dependent, their dependence is more obvious to us. This leads to their stigmatization. So I'm thinking here about people like welfare recipients, the disabled. So I'm going to drop some theory on you now and tell you a little bit about what's known as the social model of disability. Let me get a show of hands who's heard of the social model of disability. Okay, a couple of people. Please don't interrupt if I get this wrong. The rest of you are getting ready to learn something. So the social model of disability basically teaches that their disability isn't really, it's not really a quality that is inherent in a particular person. It's not that characteristics or characteristics or qualities that a particular person has. It's about the relationship between a person and the social structures that they're working in. And a kind of mismatch between those is what makes a person disabled. So a way to think about this is that we all have abilities and inabilities, things we can do, things we can't do. I can apparently do some jokes when I'm standing on stage. I can't knit. So those are some things I'm capable of, some things I'm not capable of. None of those mark me as disabled because our social structures don't require us to do any of those things. What happens, where was I going with that? Okay, so let me give you another example to sort of clarify that a bit more. I work on the second floor of an office building selling sex toys. It's not a joke, that is actually my day job. So to get up to that office, I walk up 2 flights of stairs. Now I can do that because I can walk, but in no way does that make me any more independent than a person who needs help to get up those stairs or needs a lift to get up those stairs. I'm able to walk up those stairs by depending on the built environment that I'm moving through and the people who contributed to building that environment and continue to contribute to its upkeep. People like the builders who built those stairs, the cleaners who keep it clean and safe for me to use. So it may look like there's a greater sort of independence for people who are able to move through our built environment without any friction, but that's just because their ways of depending on the people and environment around them is just a little bit more transparent to us. We don't necessarily have to see it. Okay, so you may be thinking though, most of us grow up at some point. Most of us aren't disabled. Most of us do grow up at some point and we stop depending on our families. So what about that? And it's true, I live in London. You may hear from my accent that I'm probably not from here, and that's true. And I don't live with my family anymore. A few years ago, I did move out to yes. So let me get a show of hands. Who here is from London, or who here lives in London? Sorry, I meant yeah. All right. So most of you live in London, and I'm going to assume there were a few hands, but most of you aren't from here. So most of you have moved out, even those of you who are from London, have moved out from your parents' home at some point. And we call this becoming independent. You were your parents' dependents for tax purposes at some point, and you become independent when you move out. But that's just not true. We call it that, but that's not actually what's going on. What's going on when you move out is not becoming independent, but just expanding your circles of dependence. You may not depend on your parents to cook for you anymore, but you depend on Deliveroo to bring you your meals because you live in London again. So I really want us to challenge you, and I look forward to your questions about this, but I want to challenge you to question whether we can think of independence as sort of this basic characteristic of a fully functioning human adult. But more than that, I really want to challenge you to think about whether becoming independent is something that we should be aiming for, whether that's a good thing. Instead, I want to suggest that we think about deepening and broadening our circles of people that we depend on and allow to depend on us, so that we can sort of engage with people and depend on them in more creative and profound ways. Okay, thanks for everything. Yeah.